Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and try to get started. It's 1 minute after 6, and we've got some folks online joining us. First of all, if you would like to move closer, we've got some graphics that we're going to show on the screen. It may be a little bit easier to see the closer you are. And then obviously at the end of this, if anybody would like a copy, we can email this to you in a high resolution format. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I met many of you coming in. My name is Andrew Parker. I'm the city administrator and have served with the city now for about 13 years. Many of you may know me in my prior capacity as Public Works Director. I served at the Public Works Department from 2010 until 2021, and then in August of 21 came over to City Hall. We have a big part of that was that we've got somewhere around $50 million in capital projects that the city is trying to execute over the next 2 to 3 years. Many of these are infrastructure projects. Many of these are projects to improve the quality of life, reinvestment in our park system, and some other things that I'm sure you've seen in the media, our aquatic center and others. So we're working hard on that. But a big part of what we're working on is improvement to our stormwater system. I want to thank you again for coming out tonight. We're reminded in the spring and in the summer when we have these sustained rain events why stormwater management is so critical. And I just want you to know, I think this for our team is the third public meeting we've done this year related to stormwater in different areas of the city. So we're very appreciative of you coming out. I want you to let you know we're serious. One of the 5 strategic priorities of the council right now is working on stormwater management. Funding has been allocated for projects that have been years in the making. Grant submittals have been made. We've been making submittals to the state. A lot of the federal coronavirus relief funding has been allocated for infrastructure work, including stormwater. In addition to that, we've been looking at FEMA grants as well and applying for those. We've had proactive studies that have occurred. Some projects are underway throughout the city, and we're ready to take next steps in terms of our 21st century stormwater plan. What I always tell residents is that Dalton is an old city. We're celebrating, actually the end of this year will be the city's 175th birthday. And to quantify the challenges related to stormwater management, the city was not required by law until to have a stormwater management ordinance until 2006. So that's 150 years of development with virtually no stormwater runoff control. And we're not unlike, any other city in Georgia. They're dealing with some of the same things, but due to where we are in North Georgia, we've got a lot of steep slopes. Our team's going to talk about that. But we have some really tough challenges as it relates to stormwater management and all those years of development without any runoff control. The good news is ever since 2006, we have had a stormwater management ordinances. All commercial, retail, common developments are required to address post-construction runoff controls. I'm sure you all have seen examples of this throughout the city, particularly close to you. Maybe you'll recall there at Food City, those underground detention pipes that were installed, and other places, open air ponds. And so anything after 2006 has had to put that in and have an engineer certify that the runoff after development is not any worse than what it was prior to development. So backing up to the first part of 2021 and really maybe even the late part of 2020, the mayor and council charged us with developing a stormwater plan for the city. And we, as a team, we said, how are we going to do that? We're going to have to bring on some subject matter experts on this. So we called cities throughout Georgia, cities that had been dealing with stormwater longer than we had, in the metro area and other areas to determine who they had used for their planning. And ultimately, we retained the firm Arcadis, who is here with us tonight. They're one of the foremost experts in the world in engineering and particularly in stormwater management and engineering. So they bring a lot of subject matter expertise. They've helped cities for 10 years before they even came here. So we're very thankful to have them on our side, helping us work through these issues. Tonight, we're going to kind of go through our efforts with our city plan. I know everybody's here for 133 Huntington, but we think it helps put it into perspective to at least hear what we're dealing with throughout the city very briefly. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about our efforts to develop that plan, and then we'll really dial into the project 133 Huntington. I want to clear up a couple things. I've gotten a couple calls since the letter went out about the public meeting. To clarify, the city has not yet purchased this property. We did get a little ahead of ourselves in putting a resolution on a prior council meeting to purchase the property, because for 13 years, I've heard from residents along this drainage basin, McClellan Creek, not just Dickson Acres, but even further downstream, about really, please help us. We've got major problems. We got the cart before the horse a little bit. So now we pulled back and we said, let's have this public meeting, share with everybody what our vision is for the project, and then make a determination about moving forward. Couple housekeeping items. The restrooms are just out the door on the right. We do have a sign-in sheet. You're not required to sign it, but it would help us if we ever try to need to make contact with you again, if you'll fill that out for us. We will have enough time. As long as you want to stay, our team will be here for question and answer. We'll pass a mic around at the end. I would just ask, because this is sort of a technical topic and complicated subject matter, that we just wait until the end, and then we'll answer as many questions as you have. And now I'd like to introduce our team. So from the city of Dalton, I've introduced myself. Chad, if you don't care to stand, Chad Townsend's our public works director. We hired him at the front part of the year, spent a dozen years in the private sector doing development, subdivision, development, utility construction. Jackson Shepard is our public works project manager, and he is sort of the champion of our stormwater program. He's the day-to-day contact on that program. Jackson has interned and now been employed since he's graduated engineering school with us for 7-8 years now. Devin Brooks is our right-of-way coordinator. She's doing all of the acquisition for city projects, and keeping in mind, we're not just talking about this project. We're working on some others, Market Street, and Devin is heading that effort up. And then Jorge Campos is an engineering intern doing a lot of help, helping Jackson a lot with stormwater. On the Arcata side, Richard Gruhl is here. Richard is our project manager for the entire city effort. We've been working now with Rich for 2 full years. Rich is widely regarded as one of the foremost stormwater experts in the state of Georgia. You talk to anybody that has had any involvement with stormwater across the state over the last 2 decades, and Richard Gruhl's name is always going to come up. So we're very glad for Rich's leadership. Alex Carlson is not here with us tonight. He is one of the top stormwater modelers on the East Coast. He's in Virginia Beach, who worked on a lot of projects for us. And Taylor Tittle out of the Chattanooga office is a designer. And then Madison Smith, she got called up. Is she here? Madison, thank you. She is working with hand in hand with Taylor on the design of projects. And Thomas Brown is actually a registered landscape architect that we've retained to put forward a first-class landscaping plan on this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich. We'll try to move through this efficiently. Oh, I'm sorry, Chad. Chad's going to speak first, and then we'll again open up the floor for questions at the end.
Good evening. Just to give you a brief overview of some of the ongoing stormwater efforts within the city, we'll kind of take a look at our stormwater capital improvement program. We currently have over 40 known cataloged concerns. These concerns stemming from homes being flooded, stream bank degradation or property damage, infrastructure or pipes that have reached the end of their useful life, and stormwater runoff management. From a prioritization standpoint, the factors we generally consider are flooding severity, structural flooding versus non-structural, and the frequency of these flooding events. So citywide modeling, Arcadis has created a hydrologic model for the entire city. This essentially allows us to pinpoint specific areas within the city in which our stormwater efforts need to be focused, as well as areas in which we will get the most return from these projects that we're proposing. Two projects that were completed last year and earlier this year. Covey Ridge Detention Pond. This was an existing sediment pond from the Covey Ridge development. We essentially expanded the footprint of the existing sediment pond, increasing the total storage. This helped alleviate downstream structural flooding as well as street flooding that was occurring below this project. Brookwood Drive, this one is essentially the same scenario as Huntington Road. Through voluntary participation from the property owner, we had a willing seller with known structural flooding issues in which we were able to acquire the property, demo the house that was experiencing the flooding issues, and install a flood storage facility to help mitigate flooding concerns downstream. Crater Alley, this project is in the final, final stages of design. We'll be going to bid on this project soon. This is a proposed flood storage facility immediately adjacent to City Hall here, and it'll mitigate downstream flooding as shown in the picture provided. The West Hill Detention Regenerative Stormwater Conveyance. This is the construction of a linear, a linear flood storage facility, as well as upgrading existing detention ponds to facilitate future drainage system upgrades. This all being done to ultimately prevent known structural flooding issues within the drainage area. We are currently in the procurement phase of this project and look to start this project right after the first of the year. So the city, as well as Arcadis, is extremely excited about this project. To our knowledge, the regenerative stormwater conveyance portion of this project will be potentially the only one in the state that we're aware of. So Ridge Street Phase 2 and 3 flood mitigation. This is immediately downstream from the West Hill Cemetery project. We are currently in the process of installing pipelining on the existing dated infrastructure, as well as in design on what we're kind of coining as the bypass system, which will essentially take some flow out of the rear of the residences within this drainage area. Glenwood Avenue, this one is in the design phase. It's upgrade pipe drainage systems along Glenwood Avenue and North Elm Street, where known flooding is currently occurring. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Arcadis team to speak on McClellan Creek.
Thanks, Chad. Needless to say, there's a lot going on. These guys have put the pedal to the metal, as they say, and they've got a lot going on in process right now. So tonight, we're here to talk about McClellan Creek, which is one of the major areas of concern in the catalog and the drainage catalog. I always like to talk about, I'm a drainage nerd. So, I don't know how many of y'all know where the water that comes off your properties, for those of y'all that live in the McClellan Creek watershed, but all the water that leaves your property ultimately winds up in Mobile Bay, Alabama, through a whole series of rivers. It just continues to go downstream, eventually travels over to Alabama, it goes south, and then dumps out in the bay right there. So if you're ever going out I-10 like you're going to New Orleans, you're going over Dalton, Georgia water. All right, so let's talk about McClellan Creek itself and talk a little bit about what makes this drainage basin a little bit unique. I mean, obviously, y'all's flooding problems are a little bit different than what you would have, say, down in South Georgia on the coastal plain. You're not even like the Piedmont area and kind of going north of Macon, Atlanta, those areas. You guys are in what we call the Rift and Valley system of Georgia, which means we have broad, fairly flat valley bottoms with very steep sides. And what you're seeing here on the screen is the McClellan Creek watershed if you were in a plane. So this is, think of yourself in a small plane. You're flying north, and down here at the bottom of the screen, that's Walnut Avenue. And Chick-fil-A, I've got Chick-fil-A marked out just so you can see it. And then you're looking north, like you're going downstream, down McClellan Creek. And what you'll see, and I realize it may be a little bit hard to see just because of the screen, but we've got a broad, flat, fairly flat valley where most of the development occurs. And then off to the left here, we've obviously got the mountain, which sends water screaming down the hill, comes under the interstate, and then it hits that flat and then slows down. And that's when you start getting some depth. And then while it's not as dramatic, you've got a large ridge on the right side as well. So all that water comes down off these really steep slopes, hits the bottom, and then kind of slows down, and either waters can go shallow and fast or high and slow. And that's what's happening, is we're seeing that transition through here. So that's, that's part of what's contributing to the problem. And then, obviously we've got a lot of old development that predates a lot of the current design standards. So this would probably look a little bit different today if it were built, but be that as it may, we're here. So you can kind of get a sense of where Huntington Road is. So for those of y'all who live in the Dickson Hills neighborhood, this is kind of your area, and then Walmart's back here. So that kind of describes, and Chad mentioned all the modeling that we've done. We've created citywide models. We've done very detailed land use analysis so that not only can we model some ideas that we have, but it's actually going to help produce designs down the road. So all this modeling effort is going to help facilitate design, make you guys a little more nimble, be able to analyze things quicker. All right, so kind of looking, this is again McClellan Creek watershed, as if you were in a satellite looking down. So you can see the shaded area is all the land that drains into McClellan Creek, and we've got kind of Walnut Avenue, the commercial areas around Walnut Avenue here. There's if you can see the kind of that faint line there, that's the interstate. Water's coming off the mountain here, water's coming off the ridge over here, and all draining into the valley. At the outlet, so if you go down to the bypass where McClellan Creek comes on the interstate, we've got about 2,000 acres of total drainage coming in there. At Huntington Road, that's about 20% of the watershed, catches about 400 acres. So if you're standing on Huntington Road, right there at the culvert, and you're looking downstream, that's about 400 acres comes off the mountain and comes down to you right there. So that's why it's a small creek when it's dry, and we'll just say a little larger when it's not. Again, just to kind of give you an idea, just to zoomed in, Tibbs Road, I-75, Huntington Road, and then these blue lines, if you can see them, these are the kind of the main drainage areas that come through the area. So we've got, the main stem of McClellan Creek comes off the mountain over there by the conference center, comes on the interstate, then turns north and heads towards the bypass. And then off of each of these little hills, you've got individual drainage basins and small tributaries coming down the hill contributing. All right, so as Andrew and Chad alluded to, we've been working on a lot of areas. The two biggest areas that we've been focused on have been Walnut North, what we refer to as the Walnut North area, and then McClellan Creek. And the reason McClellan Creek is we've been working on that model. We want to make sure that we got this modeling in place so that whatever we do, we don't make things worse. This is a tricky little drainage basin, and we want to make sure that we can model that from whatever we decide to do, wherever we decide to do it within the watershed. We want to make sure that we can say, okay, if we do this here, here's what happens down below us. So that's why we've like just a little bit behind the Walnut North area, which is, for those of you who were here last February, that's what we talked about. Just to give you a sense of some of the things that we've been looking at. These are some of the some flooding impacts from previous. Well, it's probably a little hard to see. There's a water line here. Andrew, do you remember what the resident is? You've got a little more history on this from your public works days.
We wanted to show you some photos of different residents downstream of Dickson Acres over the last couple of years. These photos are actually from March of 2021. The photo in the top right is a resident that lives down near Civitan Park, and that's actual structure flooding. I think the water line got up to something like 12 to 16 inches actually into the structure. The top left photo is, it's tough to see, but this is where water actually went over North Tibbs Road there at Civitan Park. And you see the remnants of where the silt settled out on top of the road. And then Rich, if you'll play that bottom left video. These are the Emerald Apartments, just a couple 100 feet north of you all. And it was the middle of the night. I forget the actual day in March of 2021, but it was the big rain event. I get this video. I was public works director at that point. And a gentleman saying, my nephew is shooting this video from his apartment and y'all are not going to be able to access them. They've got a complete loss of access from Tibbs Road, one way in, one way out. I don't know if the video is a little bit distorted. I asked if he could send it to me again, but this is what we have. This, can you play it?
Yeah. Thought it was. Let's turn the. There you go. Now we go. Now we're cooking with hot gas.
So this is the main driveway into the Emeralds. We've got a lot of senior adults that live there, and this is McClellan Creek actually spilling over into the apartment complex. And again, our fire department and police department get on notice that when that happens, and I guess we're going to ask the mayor and council for a boat to get to them. And if we don't get this stormwater problem addressed, it's a grave concern. And these are the things that keep Chad and I up at night when we have these big spring and summer storms.
Yeah. So all that brown that you see there, that's not the creek. That's the driveway. The creek is actually in the woods. So that kind of gives you a sense of what's going on downstream of the subdivision we're talking about tonight. So with that, I mean, we got problems up and down that McClellan Creek, and you know, just probably one of the bigger issues is, or challenges, I should say, is we just don't have a lot of stormwater detention in that basin. So it's all been developed, and unfortunately, it just overwhelms the system that's out there now. So, you know, tonight we're here to talk about 133 Huntington Road. Why are we even looking at that site? I mean, what makes that site special that we would even consider that as part of the solution? The biggest thing is 133 Huntington Road lies at the intersection of McClellan Creek and a pretty significant tributary. I think the first time it was described to me was they said that this is where the Mississippi and the Missouri meet. And so we've got a lot of drainage coming in that area. 133 Huntington Road lies in the upper third of the watershed. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to you guys, but that's where detention is most effective. And you think about it, you want to close the barn door before the horse gets out, not after. And so that's what we're talking about. Is we're focusing our detention thoughts up on the upper end of the watershed. One of the other things is there's an existing drainage system under Huntington Road that we can divert stormwater into a detention facility. One of the things I know is probably it may come up in a question is, why don't we just dam up McClellan Creek? We used to be able to do that, but it's become very difficult, mostly because of the regulations that have been passed in the last 20 years. They really make it hard now to get permits from the federal government to dam up creeks. And so as a general rule of thumb, that's considered a no-no nowadays. But that being said, we've got a drainage area that's bringing water to this site that we can divert into a detention pond on that site if it were available. So that's another benefit to us. And then finally, there's for those of you who are really familiar with the site, there's an old driveway that goes behind the house that used to, I guess, it accessed another home before the adjacent subdivision was built. And there is where the creek goes through that creates a natural constriction for the floodplain, creates what we call dead storage adjacent to it. And so we can actually build adjacent to the floodplain without having to worry about making things worse for it. So we've got a resident, and let me see if I can get back to that laser pointer. Let's see. Yeah. So this is 133 Huntington. One of the things that we've got to be very, very careful with, and we got to do some pretty complex modeling, is to make sure that we do not make flood elevations worse, specifically for this person or these folks as well. And, you know, you can even see This blue line is McClellan Creek. It even goes under one of the homes in the adjacent road. So we're going to have one of our modelers actually create what we call a 2D model of that area, and actually model, make sure that whatever we do, we're not going to cause the flood elevations on the creek to come up, trying to make the flood elevations go down. So pretty complex models. I'm going to be honest with you, the engineers that do that, they're probably smarter than me, but this is all technology that didn't exist 10 years ago. So again, this image, so the green kind of ovals, I guess, is right here is the 133 Huntington. That's where, if the project were to move forward, we're talking about building a small detention facility. Again, there's a drainage system that comes down along Huntington Road and then dumps out into McClellan Creek. It's actually on the discharge is on the upstream side of Huntington Road. What we would do is pick up the water that's coming through this drainage system, and instead of letting it go down and dump into the creek here, we would send it across the road and into this detention facility, hold it temporarily, and then discharge it. So we've got about 26 acres of drainage we can capture right there. That's about 6% of the watershed. And we think we can get 2 to 3 acre feet of storage into that facility, we think. To give you, so an acre foot is 1 acre of land, 1 feet deep. It's about 280,000 gallons. So we think we can get about 1 million gallons of storage in a detention pond there maybe. And we'll just store it temporarily and then send it into the creek at a much more measured rate, and hopefully provide some good benefit to the creek. To give you an idea of what that is, 2 acre feet is roughly the equivalent of about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of rain. Like we could just hold it, like 2-inch rain event could come in and we could just hold it there. Obviously, we're going to design it to maximize the benefit on the creek, so it'll probably detain a good bit more than that, but that kind of gives you an idea why we're looking at this particular area. So what would the plan be? Well, first we got to get the property. City, and that's the property owner and city council need to make that call. If there was an agreement, the plan would be to remove the home and driveway from the property. We'll get a design level survey, including property lines, creeks, utilities, everything. Just make sure we understand what's going on the property. We'll build that floodplain model that we talked about so that we make sure that we do not impact any of the neighbors, either upstream or downstream as part of this, while still maximizing our flood reduction benefits to McClellan Creek. And then once we get that model and concept plan done, that's when Taylor here, who's our civil manager for Dalton projects, he would take over at that point, build, design construction plans that a contractor could then take and go out and build the facility. So that's what the actual implementation of the plan would look like. Now I recognize this is a nice neighborhood, so I'm sure a lot of people have got some, like, they want to know what's this going to look like. So just so we're on the same page, I use the phrase detention pond sometimes. This pond will not hold water permanently on a given dry day. It'll just look like probably just a grassed area that has a berm around it that'll hold the water up, but only when it's raining. Anticipated depth of pond would probably be no more than 4 or 5 feet. So if you were standing in the bottom of the pond, top of the dam would probably be no more than this high. So we're not talking about a big imposing dam structure. Probably have gentle slopes that can be mowed very easily by normal mowing equipment. This is not going to be a wall or anything like that. It'll be probably 3-to-1 or great slopes that you could mow with just like a John Deere riding tractor. We're anticipating it'll probably be an irregular shape just to make it pleasing. And then we'll do some landscaping design. That's where Thomas here will come in and help to design a planting plan that is both functional and pleasant. The biggest thing is, and I put a picture of Covey Ridge because that's what most people think of as engineering design for a detention pond. It's just big ugly hole in the ground. That's not this case. That was already a sediment pond, so that was just kind of retrofitting an existing pond to do that. But what we're talking about is something new here. So I'm gonna take a little credit for what Thomas did here now. So this is a picture of the site right now, and what we're saying is this might be what it looks like. This is not that we haven't done any design plans, so just kind of give you a vision what it could look like. But take that and maybe make it look like that. So we do some plantings and whatnot around it and try to make it look pleasant and make it a community asset. So with that, I hope I've answered some of your questions. And I think at this point, Andrew, you want to field some questions and I'll put it back to this just so.
So I recognize that was a lot to absorb in 32 minutes, but we do want to provide as much time as we can to answer any questions. I meant to say earlier, if you're one of the immediate next door neighbors and you've got really specific questions that maybe don't apply to the rest of the group, we'll stay here and answer those for you if you don't feel like asking it from the group. So, but with that, I'll turn it over to the floor for any questions.
I'm Charles Merritt. I live on Huntington Wood. And my big question is, McClellan Creek is, I don't know how, it's a long ways. Is this the only choice we have? Or have you tried other sites?
No, this is not the only site. This was just one of several that we've tested. So we've modeled several places in this, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to solve all the McClellan Creek problems. It's just too small an area. It's going to take several facilities like this, and not all of them are going to look like this either. I mean, some of them could be floodplain reconnection projects, stream restoration projects. It's going to take more than one project to really solve the problems of McClellan Creek.
We view this as a first step. Don't want to make any misrepresentation that what we're proposing is going to stop what the video you saw, but we do think it's an actionable first step at a key point in the drainage basin to be able to provide some reduction downstream and eliminate the immediate risk of at 133. And we are also, as I mentioned earlier, looking at potentially some larger buyouts that would be funded by FEMA. They are actively looking to restore floodplain and flood zones that were constructed in, and they make almost 100% of the grant funds available for acquisition. So potentially, if we can work with the folks that own the Emerald Apartments, that's a property we're very interested in, and it's sort of secluded. Anybody that's ever driven down in there, you don't really see it from Tibbs Road, so it makes for a perfect spot to do a pretty sizable detention area. But again, we view this as a first step.
Drayton Sanders. I live at 102 Ella. This raises all sorts of questions. We're happy that downstream people will be benefited, but there are those of us just looking at your map who are upstream, who are affected by the flooding. I'm also concerned about your projection of 2 inches of rain. We've seen a lot more than that. I don't think this pond would hold the 3s and 4s that we have seen from time to time over the years. I've been living there for a long time, but where we are, we see it come up and try to go across Ella Lane. And there are lots of people impacted above where you're projecting this. What are you going to do about the situation above us?
Go ahead.
So the great thing about Rich and his team, about a year ago, we were the beneficiary of the federal government came in and provided LIDAR data, which is elevation data for the entire county. So it's allowed them to look at really pinpointing where the most strategic, efficient areas would be in all of these drainage basins where we have concerns. It was a little bit tough to see. We're going to be replacing the video equipment so that for meetings like this down the road, you'll be able to see in high resolution. But Rich showed a map. One of the first things we did when we started trying to put this plan together was put push pins on every single structure that we had ever gotten a residential call from, or commercial for that matter too, to try to identify where we had hot spots within the city where we focus funding, focus projects. And so we're to speak to your concern of this is more for downstream benefit, I would agree with that. But we have already started looking at potentially upstream, what can be done. Is there property that is potentially inside the subdivision that would be available at the immediate downstream points of the interstate? Is there, our team has already been looking at, is there right of way or property on the west side of the interstate before it ever goes under? So we're looking at all that right now at a high level. We've got some of the most advanced people working behind the scenes on this, and we continue to identify those locations. We have, as part of this planning effort, developed a capital projects list. We're working through that list. Once we get one of these boxes checked off, we go to the next one. We can't fund all of this locally, so we're pursuing these grants, as I talked about. The council, to show their commitment in funding, they've issued debt through a bond issuance to allocate money towards stormwater, because we're very fortunate. As you all know, many communities have stormwater utility fees that you pay for per month. The council has resolved not to have to do that here. We think we can do it other ways in generating funding to do these programs and these projects. But I certainly recognize, and we'll be very candid, this, I don't want to misrepresent that this will totally improve the situation in the subdivision, but we hope it will provide, and we have technical reasons and the modeling to assure it will provide some meaningful risk reduction downstream. Here's the good and bad news. The good news is McClellan Creek was one of those hot spots. So a lot of the funding we've allocated has been allocated to this basin. So the map that you couldn't really see on the screen, I mean, there were like 6 or 8 of those push pins just within this tiny, I mean, in comparison to the size of the city, pretty small concentration of a lot of flood and structure issues. And so we will be continuously working in this basin. Some of the small things that we're looking at too, I've gotten calls from the folks that live immediately downstream from the interstate, stabilizing those banks where we've had these high velocity runoffs. Instead of, doing any kind of detention, potentially just doing armoring, what we call armoring of the stream banks to prevent further scour, further property loss. Heard from residents say, I've lost 3-4 feet of yard because there's no diffusion of this energy coming off the mountain and under the interstate. So we're looking at all of that.
Have you tested the stormwater? Grease, oil is a hazard material, and you gonna put all of that. Me putting something like that in a subdivision like a snag on tooth. So you're gonna put all that stuff, oil and all that coming off interstate, chicken blood and all that stuff. You're gonna run it in that pond there, and you got, that's a hazard material. Do you know? I feel sure y'all know how to handle that.
Very valid question. As part of our requirements with the EPD, we do have to do testing. I don't think we've tested this particular water. This facility will have, do you want to address that, Rich? It will have a control structure that allows us to remove that. It will be settled, any kind of solid debris that comes and collects in that. The public works crews will be able to maintain it. And Rich, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, your point is valid. So that kind of bluish area, that's what would drain into the pond under this proposal. So there wouldn't be any interstate water. This will just be water in the subdivision that would flow down to the pond. We're not pulling water from Walnut Avenue or the interstate or anything like that. This is just meant to control the water coming off the subdivision and throttle that back so that McClellan Creek can hopefully go down a little bit. Yeah, that water coming off the interstate is coming through this blue line right here. And that will not go into the pond. That'll be adjacent to the pond. So it'll continue to go behind the house. Remember, we can't dam up the creek. So yeah, and we're not damming that up. Are you right here? Just so everybody knows, is that about right? Does it go north from there and then catch into this drainage and then goes kind of between the houses back here? Yeah, this red line right here. So yeah. So the OCS he's talking about, it's called outlet control structure, and what it is that's how we throttle the water. So you think about we let the water in fast, and the OCS is done to allow it to go slow so that we can allow the water to stage up and then come out slower, and then also it helps with capture. But again, the intent here is not to put interstate water into this pond.
One thing I'll add too, I mentioned earlier that any project after 2006, if Dickson Acres was constructed today, it would be required to have a detention pond in it. Can't really access it because it's a dirt road right now, but the expansion in Ryman Farm, phase 6 on the backside, I think they constructed 2 or 3 ponds. I recognize it's not right next to the interstate like this is, but this is something for modern subdivisions they have to construct in a subdivision to make it compliant with the rules.
Andrew, I've got a couple of comments and then some questions. Some things you guys have told me in the past that I think would help the audience. For instance, didn't you mention that it would take approximately 200 acres, stormwater control areas and detention areas to, generally speaking, to control an area this large?
Yeah, 3-4%.
Yeah. So we don't have 200 acres anywhere. And so we have to take this piece by piece, little project by little project, right?
That's also the challenge of being a 175-year-old city. We don't have a lot of land, particularly where you have a willing seller, and we have not reached the point yet, of using any kind of eminent domain. We want to work with people if they're willing to sell, and it is in a strategic location like this that we can get some benefit from. That makes it an opportunity. But John is exactly right. Rich and his team have said that in order to really address any of the issues that we saw in those photos, we're not going to be able to acquire 200 acres in this basin. We're going to have to address this by doing small projects like this and get the cumulative benefit. Our ordinances do also now provide for techniques for green infrastructure and low impact design on commercial development to try to infiltrate more water rather than just dumping it in a detention pond and letting it go downstream. But we hope through cumulative benefit of smaller projects like this, we'll be able to notice a big difference.
Thank you. And if we could go back to the picture of what it might look like. There we go, that one. Andrew, we also discussed that you could do this without a fence and just with landscaping.
That was another key point. We recognize that the subdivision has covenants, and we want to, if we are able to acquire this, we want to obey those covenants as a landowner. And so that's why we brought the landscape architect on board to meet with your architectural committee to discern exactly what types of beautification that you all would want, particular species of plantings, and I understand that fences are not allowed in the front yard. And so this illustration shows one, but we think we can satisfy the ordinance requirements just through a barrier of landscaping.
Thank you. Rich, this next one's for you, please. When you showed the aerial photo or the one like from a plane, it showed us that the McClellan drainage area basically runs from Walnut Avenue to the Rocky Face exit between those two.
Yes, sir.
And if we consider the interstate with 3 lanes of traffic and shoulders on each side, There's a tremendous amount of impervious surface there. First off, is there any detention on the right of way for I-75?
If there is, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, didn't think so. Are you aware of any projects in the state where communities have been able to build detention areas within the right of way of an interstate?
Where communities have built
Or the DOT has built them?
The DOT has.
Is that an option for us to push for the DOT to build detention to help these tributaries, both McClellan Creek and, for instance, the tributary coming behind the one that you said won't come onto this lot, the one that's behind Bucky's house? We could really impact, we could solve their problem if we could get the DOT to do something.
I'm going to say two things. One is they're subject to the same federal laws that we are. So they can't, it's hard for them to dam up a creek too, which, you know, they're a state agency, but still state,
right?
Federal, state, local.
Yep.
So that's one thing. And then that would be kind of, it's a little bit of a political question. So we're in District 6, GDOT's District 6, and I think that might be something to approach the district manager with, kind of at that level. It does happen. That kind of idea does happen. I don't know if it happens a lot on interstates, but it does happen.
Well, I'm looking at two politicians over here, one of whom used to serve on the DOT board. So perhaps
then he knows.
Perhaps we could.
He knows there's a process there. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's it.
Hello, I'm David. I live up on top of Huntington Woods Way Hill, so I don't have a flooding problem, but I am interested in what goes downhill and what everybody else catches at the basin. I run around that block. I cross that creek twice and I see where it runs through. Every time we leave our house and every time we come back, go past this lot, we have to look at it coming and going. Right now, it's pretty nice to look at. So I do have concerns about anything else that's put there. And your statement of the foot acreage that we could cover, what is the acreage actually of the retention pond itself? It's not a huge lot.
We don't know the lot's a little over an acre, I think. The pond won't be the full size of the lot because there are some state mandated buffers, and we've got again, I don't know what the final size of the pond's going to be just because we haven't done the modeling of the floodplain yet. Obviously, we don't want to flood the neighbor by pushing the water off of that property onto the neighbor's property.
Right. So your only option then is to get 2 to 3 foot acres of retention, is to go deeper and deeper on it.
Yeah.
And if you were going to use just a gravity fed controlled thing to let it run over. So then you're counting on filtration, absorption to empty the pond.
You can't go any.
Yeah. Well, if you have back-to-back rains, it's not doing much good. It's still flooded the rest of the time. So to get 2 or 3 acres, foot acres in there, because of the graduation of the slope that comes down to what you're going to get, is you're going to have a 6-foot ditch over there. Is that about what we're looking for, the depth and the dam that you have to build around it?
So a couple things. We can't go any lower than we got to stay above the creek because, it won't drain into the creek. So we're not talking about utilizing infiltration at all.
So you're really only getting whatever runoff comes above creek level.
Yes. So it'll come up, obviously no higher than the road. So we'll have that. And so no infiltration, and it'll positively drain. So, I don't want to say 6, 8, 10, 12 hours after the rain stops, it should be dry.
Trap door.
Yeah.
If it's empty on the other side, the water will come in.
Yeah.
If it's not empty, it's not coming in. You're going to retain that water in that.
That's one of the things we talked about.
Until it does go through the bottom. So
this is
it doesn't look like a whole lot of gain for a lot of work. If there's $750,000 dollars spent on purchase, so much construction, how much you're really going to get out of the project if it can't actually do anything?
Again,
Any water level below.
Again, remember, we said it'll be 4 to 5 feet deep, probably, maybe a little deeper, could be, I don't know. We got to look at the topo and the grading plan. That's where this guy comes in. But
all the dam and the buildup around it, the neighbors next door are going to see this above their property.
They wouldn't see it above their property because it's, again, it may be this high.
Slope down to that lot.
Say that again.
It's not 4 or 5 feet of slope from the next door neighbor down to that lot. So having to go down, you're going to have to come up around the edge. If you got it in street view. Okay.
So this is.
It's not a great drop off.
No, it's not. And that's why we're saying it's not going to, and I looked at the LiDAR. So that 4 to 5 feet is based on the creek and about here.
That creek is down a ways from that, and that's where you're going. So we'll still end up looking at a hole down, even when you put the dam around. Hopefully, it won't look like a dam to the neighbor next door and stop anything from coming off their lot. So you're not getting a big thing for your buck at this location. Other acreage locations, that gets you a lot more.
Just briefly, again, remind that this is not what we view as a one-size-fits-all solution for what 2,000 acres that drain through this basin, but we do feel like it's a very meaningful first step. And keeping in mind that there is some flooding now at this location for the structure. So we have a city resident who has flooding that's built partially in the floodplain. And that's part of the decision making as well. It's been a long-standing issue and trying to address that the best we can. Yes. I'm not going to speak. Okay. I don't know that we've got the pictures in the presentation, but we do have pictures of where it stages almost into the garage, and it is definite area of concern for the city. Show that drawing that's got the blue. Yeah, there you go. If you'll walk through that again, Rich.
The most of the water that's going to come to this pond is going to come off Huntington Road. So this is where the creek crosses. So I think this is, I forget, she was right there somewhere. Was it your house? Yeah. So this. Exactly. Yeah, yes.
Bucky, as we've discussed before, I don't think you're correct on that. Having been a developer, I can say that when the developer does a new project, he has to design his own new detention facilities so that there's no more water running off after he builds, for instance, his hotel on the other side of the interstate than there is before he builds it. But it's not the developer's job to completely control all the water that's coming down off of the mountain. And so I think what you're seeing is we just haven't had a big enough flood event. And that when we have a big flood event, you will see again a big rush of water behind your house and that same scouring effect that you've had before. Yeah. So that actually, if you did before, you will again. I understand. Right. Yeah, as we discussed, I don't think this project solves your problem or Steve Sharp's problem, for instance. And it shows it's outside of the scope of this project back there. So that's why I was asking the question about the interstate and can they do something there? And I meant to ask, yeah, and I meant to ask if there was something that can be done on the west side of the interstate also.
And our team has really been trying to identify areas on the west side. Again, most of that's developed. So we've got a few nooks and crevices that potentially could be used. We're looking at all that right now. We're working, as I mentioned earlier, on the aquatic center that we're looking at the property. We're working on acquiring the property just south. There's a 10-acre tract just south of, will you show Rich with your laser pointer, the convention center? The great thing about that, we only need about 5 acres to build the actual building and parking. And then there's a lower level, if you're familiar with the convention center, lower level gravel lot where we're going to be required to do the detention pond, as I've said, for any new development. And so we have a great opportunity to oversize that pond to help address, because again, when the convention center was built prior to 2006, there was no requirement to handle any stormwater runoff. So if we're able to work to acquire that land, we will build probably a 2 or 3 acre detention pond. And hopefully we can oversize it to where any of that runoff that we can bring over from the convention center can be routed into the pond and hold it before it ever makes it into that tributary that you're talking about.
I live directly behind the All Goods, and my property, my back property line is the convergence of those same creeks. I have never had any flooding. Now, when was it, Easter Sunday, 2-3 years ago, when we had all that, once or twice I have seen that creek get into my yard, maybe a foot or two. I have never had a flooding problem, and I live directly behind them. I've got a creek behind me and a creek beside me. And the creek behind me has never flooded because of that road bed. And the creek beside me has never gotten into my house.
Hey, my name is Ian Whittle. I'm at 102 Broadview Terrace. I have a question more about zoning and how it may relate to another aspect of the neighborhood. When you purchase this land, demolition, created drainage ditch, does that affect the zoning at all? Because we've had issues with zoning on the other side of the neighborhood, and actually the Olive Garden Menace has actually filed something last week to reopen that zoning issue. So would this have any effect on that if we're changing the nature of a residential neighborhood into a detention pond?
And fortunately, we almost have to allow it when the Unified Zoning Ordinance was written. And as I said, in 2006, even residential common developments are required to address post-construction runoff control. So the zoning ordinance does provide for stormwater flood mitigation projects to occur in a residential zone district. As I mentioned, Ryman Farm, for example, they're having to build like 3 ponds just for phase 6, and it's all zone residential. So, but that is a very good question.
Just in general, what time frame are you looking at? Because we're talking here about their models that are going to be around 2D models on the drainage. There's prospective design plans. You said you put the cart before the horse previously in purchasing the land. Is there going to be some sort of final design or final presentation regarding what the impact is going to be before the purchase, or is it just something that's going to be addressed? At what point are you going to address it, I guess, before you purchase the land?
Fortunately, as Rich sort of alluded to, and you may want to go into more detail, we're able to do preliminary modeling based on the LiDAR data that we have. So we already know what to 90% of the benefit that we can create here without doing the full-blown model. The model is more or less QCing that quality control in that final plan, just to make sure, like Rich said, we're not doing anything. We get our dam placement exactly where it needs to be so that it's not causing any issues immediately downstream or to the side. And then as to schedule, Chad, do you want to speak to that? What the typical construction and everything would be?
Yeah, so from an engineering standpoint, Rich,
I think I was allowing for 6, but that's all the way to the end. So concepts would be done probably within 3 months.
yeah, and that's pending survey. Surveyors at this time are, anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 months out. And then from a construction aspect of it, obviously that would kind of fall on exactly what the final design looks like. But I would venture to say, 6 months is, a very, very easy target to hit on the construction side. So from the time we get the work go, I would say 6 to 9 months.
So the charge that we received from the mayor and council was to have the public meeting, get some kind of understanding of consensus of the group, concerns, compliments, indifference or whatever, take that back to them and make a decision about whether or not they're ready to entertain a resolution to purchase. So if there was, broad support for the project, probably in the next few weeks, to put a resolution before the council to sign a contract with the seller, and then from then it would be just the timeline of construction that Mr. Townsend identified.
Mine is just a tiny different observation. One is, it seems that y'all are moving into neighborhoods. That concerns me, because you said we've got to have several of these around. So somebody comes to town and they think, what are all these ditches around? I'll be honest, I didn't even know you were doing this until I came down. I used to live in Brookwood, and I thought, what happened to that house right there? And there was this unattractive fence there with this in there. Now, I know y'all promised a lot of things, but you got to have the money to take care of it, make it look right. And I don't want this happening all over in neighborhoods. See it?
I live next door on 131 Huntington. We've lived there for over 40 years. We've had a beautiful home next door, beautifully landscaped, wonderful neighbors. I am not happy at all about the idea of having a pond next door. And I'm not really impressed with the setting of what you're showing. It's going to be over.
Thank you. The only thing I'll say on that is, again, I mentioned we would want to, if approved, we would want to work with the architectural committee to put forward a landscape plan that would be satisfactory to the committee and be in compliance. The purchase, yes, you're right.
Okay. I've got a question about the finances. What's the total cost of this whole project and where's the money coming from?
There are about on the books somewhere around $6 to $8 million of stormwater projects that have received funding, and that they're made up of funds from the 2015 SPLOST. There was a category for roads, bridges, and stormwater projects. As I mentioned earlier, the city has issued debt. We've issued a bond for 3 projects. One is stormwater projects. One is the aquatic center, and the third is the Market Street improvements. And so the funding for this project is coming either from the bond or from the 2015 SPLOST. Yes, sir. We're paying the fair market valuation that was done by an independent appraiser, and that we're required by law to offer the fair market value appraisal. It was on the agenda, $704,000, I believe, somewhere in that range. Again, we had a certified appraiser that's GDOT pre-qualified to do this type work, do that work. So we rely on their valuation.
Number one, it sounds like y'all going to move forward. I mean, since you almost purchased already, can you make sure that the committee approves the plans before they go out for construction, landscaping, whether they want higher vegetation, all sod, that kind of thing, before it goes out to bid? And probably in the second part, most importantly, I know you said you're going to do the maintenance, but how can you guarantee everybody how you're going to maintain it? I mean, that's something that's going to be mowed weekly and landscape kept up and all that kind of stuff.
I'll let Chad speak to the maintenance plan. On the landscaping plan, absolutely. We would want the landscape architect to work directly with the architectural review committee, get a plan that's in keeping with the best case scenario in terms of what the covenants are and what landscaping you would like to see. Although this was not a stormwater project, we had, many of you may recall the slope failure we had on Botany Woods Drive 2 or 3 years ago. And there was some really mature vegetation that really blocked the line of sight to a person's house. And they were really concerned, as much as you all are, about, placing that vegetation back. And so although it was really probably more landscaping than what this footprint will be, but we worked hand in hand with that property owner to try to develop a plan that they were approving of, and it ended up being a very successful project.
So from the maintenance aspect of it, this would essentially just fall in line under our normal, not day to day, but week to week spots in which we'll get maintained as well. As we continue to expand additional stormwater facilities, obviously that's going to require more manpower. But from this one, obviously we can cover the manpower we currently have. So I don't foresee maintenance being an issue.
Adrian, do we have any questions online? Okay.
Would it be possible? I know it's more expensive, but why can't this retention be underground and the level land and maybe look a lot better than church had to put that in under our parking? Seems like this could be done there as well.
That would be something we would hope to hear from the architectural committee. And we're actually This pond right next to City Hall, if you saw the slide that Rich showed with the Prater Alley flooding, we're actually bidding that project two ways, one with underground detention that you don't see, and then one with above ground, because it is more expensive to go underground. It's just more labor intensive, more aggregate pipe and everything, but it can be done.
I don't think I heard the answer about how much do you expect to spend on this project?
So as I mentioned, the appraised value of the property was just over 700,000. And then based on right now, unfortunately, the way the market is, everything is coming in. I think it's going to resolve itself pretty soon with interest rates, but all of our bids are coming in way over budget right now. Sometimes 100% over budget. We've never seen anything quite like this, but we're estimating the grading plan, the landscaping, in addition to the 700,000, probably another 300,000, 350. So it'd be just over $1 million to do this project.
I heard the question addressed a while ago about maintenance, i.e., mowing lawn, taking care of the landscaping. You mentioned earlier something about having to do maintenance in the pond. My first question is that something that would happen frequently? And if you could go back to the visual of what we think it'll look like, look what. There we go. Thank you. So if I heard earlier, there would not be a lot of water. The water would not continually be in this pond, correct? So when the water's not in the pond, it's a brown hole.
It would probably be just a lawn.
Be what?
Be a lawn.
Like green grass.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it would only hold water when it rained. So it'd be like, just think about a low point in your yard. Your yard, if you got a low point in your yard, it fills up with water, and then after it stops raining, it drains out. And this would be the same way. It would just, and again, this is not a final landscape plan. This is just an idea that kind of what it potentially could look like. But as far as this would be regulated, this pond would be regulated under the MS4, the city's MS4 permit. So there's maintenance requirements, but typical maintenance on a pond like this is just mostly mowing, any kind of debris that needs to be removed, anything that gets washed in would be removed, mowed, and then depending on what the landscaping looked like, there may be some aspects to that, trimming, things of that nature. But as far as maintenance, it's almost like a lawn.
I appreciate that. And again, I know you guys are working to solve through something. I appreciate the efforts going into this. I live directly across the street. I'm worried about what I'm going to be seeing besides the all goods beautiful home. I'm worried about my property values. I get it. We've got to solve for a problem, but that's where I am. I know that's where the McCameys are. That's where the others around them.
Would. Yeah, I want to address that. I've talked to several. Yeah. What I'll say about that project is that we didn't have a landscape architect. The landscaping was done by the crews. Sort of after the fact. It was only our second project to do like this. So we're learning as we go. This is relatively new for us. As Chad showed, Chad showed the two ponds, the one near the hospital. It doesn't have any landscaping. But obviously we understand there's a heightened concern about what this would look like. And that's the whole reason we went to the degree of bringing a landscape architect on the team that would work with the committee and hopefully make it look. I mean, I really hope that it would look very close to what you see there on the screen.
Yeah, so we do go periodically throughout the city and in standing water areas and put, we call briquettes in the standing water that essentially eliminates the mosquito larvae to keep the mosquito population down. Obviously, here, given this location, I mean, we can certainly design it in which there won't be, you know, a wet containing any water. So that would definitely be what we were trying to achieve with this.
Hey, thank you. I'm Steve Sharp. I live at 1904 Rena Lane, which is upstream of this property. I'm the one that has the culvert coming from the interstate and gets all the wash coming off of that. So my question though is this project supposed to abate the flooding downstream like off the tips, or is it to mitigate the flooding on the Allgoods property? Because my point might be is that the Allgoods flooding might be coming from the creek, the tributary creek coming off the interstate rather than the McClellan Creek. And if this is really designed to get the Tips Road development, all that property, then why aren't you looking more at the property around the Emerald Apartments? Because if I'm not mistaken, there was a pond there at one time, or an old spring that would be, seemed like an ideal spot for a detention pond.
Yeah, we've been modeling both. I mean, there's going to be multiple facilities to really get McClellan Creek under control, and it's, you know, it's going to be here. It's going to be, you know, potentially down there. It'll be up. You know, we got to find sites upstream. As the gentleman, I think it was you that lived off of Ella Lane. You know, this isn't going to help him at all. So we'll have to look at stream, you know, areas up there. He mentioned we're looking on the west side of the interstate. So it's not going to be a one and done kind of thing.
And as I said earlier, in a small way, we're trying to replicate the approach that FEMA has taken. FEMA sees the value in removing any kind of development that has occurred in the floodplain or in the flood storage area for which this property is in. It doesn't go all the way to the west property line, but this property is within that floodplain area that FEMA has identified. So taking an approach similar to them to provide for the reconnection of the floodplain. A lot of what we see constructed today probably would not be permitted under current day codes because of buffers on streams. Our floodplain ordinance, probably when this subdivision was built, I don't even think a floodplain management ordinance existed for the city. So a lot has changed, and it's a really tough challenge for the staff to try to think of creative ways to do this without just, you know, acquiring what we said 200 acres to try to make some meaningful improvements, and at the same time fielding those calls from concerned residents about having to go out in the middle of the night and put up buffers to their house, and they're sending me those pictures, and we can't say that we have an answer for it. So it's really a tightrope. We're having a challenging time navigating. That's why we brought these experts on the team and trying to make the best decision that we can given the ingredients that we have.
My name's Chris Zimmer. I'm with 106L, neighbors with gentlemen in front of here. I understand that the solution is going to have multiple steps, and that this particular project is going to marginally, maybe slightly more than marginally help. It seems to me, why wouldn't you want to start at the top where the problem is? Because I live on that creek. It runs through my property, and it looks like the Ocoee River some days. It's dead dry until they open the dam. And then it's class 4 rapids in my backyard. It seems as though it would be logical to do the first project in your string of things up river or up issue, see what impact that has before you then can justify more downriver projects. So I guess my point is I don't understand why we're not starting higher up, where I think you're hearing a lot of the issues about the interstate and what we get off the mountain, that would have a whole lot more meaningful payout for you guys. And it may mean we don't need the downriver projects.
That is a very good point. What I will say is, going back to the Y-133, we have a willing seller. We don't have that everywhere. We're not, the council is not in a position at this point to use eminent domain for these types of projects. That's a very sensitive issue, and it's really more or less a project of opportunity. We have a location that makes sense, a willing seller. But your point is valid. As Rich said, you want these projects to be in the upper reaches of the drainage basin if possible. But it's just here we have a willing seller upstream. We don't have anybody that's willing to sell. Yeah, what I'll say is this is all under continuous evaluation. That the technical folks are constantly looking at sites to do work like that. It's just a matter of identifying those and reaching out to the property owner and determining whether or not they would be interested. It's just this particular site has been a long-standing concern of the city because of the calls we receive when we get these big rain events. And it was in our off right of way, what we call our off right of way catalog. Anytime we've got documented calls from residents saying, I've got flooding, or I've got, we've had this big issue, we've documented those and we've tried to pinpoint solutions on where those known reported concerns have been.
This is an opportunity for you to satisfy a few people. It's an opportunity to satisfy your relationship with the government who's pushing you to do stormwater. But what you're trying to do is empty a bathtub with a straw.
If you go back to that slide, 26 acres that you see in the blue, 26 acres. Your problem is what's coming off the interstate, but as I've tried to explain, we're also concerned about the residents downstream. Those pictures I showed you. Right. It's 2,000 total acres, and we've got an opportunity to do something we think that will provide some marginal benefit. Yep.
I just want to appreciate all y'all's assistance in trying to get this together to help people from underneath. My name's Craig Well. I own 2 properties now in the same subdivision. And my question is, what percentage of the downstream water is? I heard that you said 200 or 2,000 square feet out of 200,000. Is that right? So we're 1%.
Well, there's 2,000 acres after it goes under the bypass at Huntington Road. The main creek catches about 400 acres. So it's about 400 acres there. I should have looked it up. I can't remember what the amount of drainage is that's coming off of the coming under the interstate and that little smaller tributary that's behind their house. I want to say it's a little over 100 maybe. So it's, that's coming a lot faster than what's coming down from Ella Lane. But you're
I mean, I see that you're trying to stop and help the people down below. I guess at some point there's trying to keep shrinking it down until you get a point to where it's not a problem for people. But at some point there's a maximum, there's a minimum level. And would that much really make that much of a difference? I see you're trying to, see what I'm saying? You're chipping away, but is it really going to make that much difference if that's 1% of the water coming into that McClellan Creek, or is it 2% or 10%? I think it's 10%. But I know Bucky would say it's not 10% because he can look out his front door and see what y'all are seeing coming down our road. Then he can look out his back door and see that creek. Bucky, you think it's 1% here in your versus? It's a major difference coming off the mountain.
So again, about 400 acres coming under McClellan Creek, and the water that's draining into that drainage system on Huntington, it's kicking in another 26 acres. So it's 400 before it goes under the road and or right there at the road coming down to the culvert, and then that drainage system is kicking in about another 26 acres. So what we're trying to do is just control that. And again, it's not going, this one project is not going to fix the problem. But let's say it drops at 4 or 5%. You do that a few times, and all of a sudden you're starting to do some damage, and that really needs to be distributed up and down the watershed. Because to his point, it's not going to help Ella Lane. But if we do another one upstream at above Ella Lane, that helps them, and then it compounds when it gets to this point because we've taken this out, and then we go downstream maybe to the apartment complex that he was talking about. That might make a difference, but at some point you've made a difference. If we had the land, the trick is you got to find two things. You got to have land, and you got to have the ability to get water there without damming up McClellan Creek. Because if you dam up McClellan Creek, the feds are going to shut you down.
Change small things all the way down the street, take a massive dip, starting at the top, or take a big swath of land, try to hold the street.
So there's two things you're talking about. Two things there. One is what we call the hydrologic, which is that's how much water gets to the creek. So you think about it, if it's 10 gallons going down to the creek, and you say now I'm gonna make it 5, without changing the geometry of the channel, that obviously makes it go down. Then what you're talking about with what you did was hydraulically, you made the pipe bigger. And you can do that. That's so, I don't know if you guys remember, Andrew said something called floodplain reconnection. That's essentially what you were doing. Was you think about a lot of our urban creeks get real blown out, and they get real deep and real narrow. And so what happens is during the flood events, it never gets out of that channel. And so it goes real fast. And floodplain reconnection is we want that channel to be fairly shallow with a big flood bench. And that's kind of what we're talking about at the apartment complexes, reconnecting, because that was all, it looks like it was all filled in to build the apartment complex a little bit. And so what we're talking about there is leave the driveway potentially and excavate out everything behind it, kind of what you did, but on a much grander scale, and let that water stage up in there and slow down. So that, you know, kind of slow it down. And that's essentially what you did. We're just talking about on a much bigger scale. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. So during some of the bigger storm events, again, because we would dig this pond down somewhat, not down to all the way down to the creek, but we would allow, again, for some of that same idea to some degree, allow for that flood water to back up in there, store it temporarily, and go head out. So.
May still have some more questions, but our staff has taken note of everything that was said this evening. We're going to compile all of this, prepare a report for the mayor and council, and continue to evaluate. Your input is important and critical, and we appreciate how to the point you've been. It gives us a clear understanding of what the concerns are, and it really allows us to make some informed decisions moving forward. We'll be glad to stay as long as you'd like. We'll, did you want to say something?
Thanks, Andrew. First of all, of course, I think I know everybody in this room with maybe one or two exceptions. But as you know, I've lived there in this neighborhood with you. My family actually moved there in 1967. And I think when Harriet Moore finally moved out, I've now been there longer. Me or my family have been there longer than anybody else in the whole subdivision. When we moved there in 1967, Huntington Road, this part of Huntington Road we've been talking about, was just still a gravel road. And the first house after you turned off of Tibbs Road would have been the house where Charles and Sarah live now. Even the house that y'all just moved out of, the Tidwell house, Donnie Ellis built that house, you know, shortly after we moved there. But when we would drive, when we would ride our bikes up and down Huntington Road on both sides, really, where you live, Bucky, where the Allgoods, that was all cattails. And from down where Charles, Sarah lived, all the way down to where y'all live, till the Hickeys built that house. When you got past, it was then the Westmore house where the Merritts live now. That was, a lot of that was cattails. And we wouldn't even go off, even when it was dry, it was still wet, you know, so we didn't even go off in there and play much because it was, you know, pretty wet even at those times. So this isn't something that's happened overnight. And probably nowadays, like Andrew said, a lot of those houses probably wouldn't be able to be built, you know, in that area. You know, it would have been considered, I guess, a floodplain and wetlands. So I'm wearing two hats here tonight. I've been in this subdivision longer than any of y'all have. And also I'm on the city council. And when I learned about this project, which was in the works before I got on the council back in January, and then it came up, you know, for acquisition of the property and so forth, I said, Andrew, you know, we've got to have a meeting. You know, I didn't know about it, so I know nobody else in the neighborhood knows about it, and I need to learn about it. I've learned a lot here tonight. I didn't realize that either it wasn't going to alleviate problems from either one of these creeks. You know, I didn't realize that it was apparently all coming from this other blue area. You know, I thought, I guess at some point it could address those creeks a little bit, but not primarily. But anyway, we had one of these situations come up where my sister lives over there where my mom dad moved after they left Dickson Acres back in February. And I again asked for a public hearing, and we had 2 nights of public hearings for this project that came through the cemetery. So I'm all about transparency and information. And before we move to the next step, I wanted to have all of you here, and I wanted all of you to become educated, just like I'm getting educated tonight. I think that's what it's all about. When I was on the DOT board, I was always, that was actually one of our requirements, Devin. As I recall, we always had to have a public hearing, and I went to public hearings, not here in but all over the night. It was in the 9th congressional district, even down in places like Gainesville and places like that. But yeah, that's what this is all about. And I appreciate the mayor being here tonight to hear all of this. I wish all the council actually could have been here. But I know it's there's a lot going on. But I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I've been on the, not on it right now, but I've been on the subdivision board there many years. Back with Drayton, we went through many battles, we had one a couple of years ago after I was not on that board anymore, but certainly was involved in that when they tried to come into our subdivision from over on Walnut Avenue. But I appreciate everybody coming, and I appreciate Andrew and all the crew being here tonight. And I think we just need to digest all this. We need to evaluate all of it before we take the next step. But I really, really do appreciate everybody. It takes a commitment to come out tonight. But I know one of the first things I told Andrew about when he said this, I said, I drove over Brookwood like a lot of y'all had. And I said, what is this, Andrew? We're not going to have anything like this in our neighborhood. And number one, and number two, we need to go back over to Brookwood, put something aesthetic over there, because I used to live in Brookwood even before I lived in Dickson Acres. And it's a beautiful neighborhood in our community. And just like our neighborhood doesn't need something that looks like that with a chain link fence around it and all the dead plants around it, we don't need that over in Brookwood either. So that we certainly need to work on that as well. I'm surprised those people hadn't been down here and out. But anyway, that's all I've really got to say, but I'll certainly stay after this talk to you as well.
I want to give you all my cell phone number. If you have any questions that come up, I want to make sure I'm as accessible as I can be. And if I don't know the answer, we'll get an answer. I want to give it to you now. If you're ready to take this, 706-537-7220. That's my lifeline. It's rang about 3 times here tonight, but we appreciate you working with us, being transparent, sharing this. I assure you we will take this feedback under consideration, and we will report back. I think there's one, 706-537-7220. That's my cell phone number.
Andrew said a minute ago, a lot of communities have a small fee of maybe $1 or $2. I don't know. It's a small fee on every utility bill that's designated specifically for stormwater management. We don't have that here in the city of Dalton, but addressing one of the questions that was here earlier, using the taxpayers' money, instead of going out and having to get bonded indebtedness and things like that, it's a pretty painless way, to have a lot of people contribute just a little bit every month just for this sole purpose, because this stormwater problem is definitely not going to go away. And it's something I think we need to look at, maybe possibly.
All right, with that, we'll close the meeting, but our team will be here. If you want to ask us a more specific question, we'll be glad to stay. Thank you.